Hey everyone, Harry here. Before we dive into today's episode, I've got some exciting news about an upcoming event in our Talking San Diego series. On Thursday, May 29th at noon, we'll be welcoming Senator Cory Booker for a conversation focused on our current political moment and how to move forward. For tickets and more information on this and all Talking San Diego events, visit talkingsandiego.net. Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman. We tend to think of Donald Trump as an avatar of malice and tyranny, but an important gloss to that portrait is his profound fickleness. Trump careens wildly from one position to the next, and it is this very instability, as much as his pettiness and cruelty, that sows chaos in American life and reverberates across the globe. With boasts about his supposed superhuman deal-making prowess, Trump promised during the campaign to end the Ukraine-Russia war in 24 hours. This week, he revealed his hand, offering a poison pill deal to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, coupled with the ultimatum that the United States would walk away if Zelensky didn't capitulate. The move, among other things, laid bare Trump's utter fecklessness as a negotiator. The terms of the offer sheet were basically Russia gets everything it wants and more, including a recognition of its unlawful annexation of Crimea as lawful. Zelensky, who knows his people and has led them bravely for years against an evil warmonger, immediately rejected the gun-to-the-head terms. The failed gambit is already damaging America's standing in the world, with two grim possibilities ahead. Either Trump follows through, dealing a devastating blow to U.S. credibility and global influence, or true to form as just last week with tariffs, schools, and the Fed, he shrugs it off with a never mind, further exposing his own weakness and instability. Back in the United States, Trump's harebrained and unqualified cabinet made headlines, but not the kind any administration hopes for. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was caught in a second serious breach of security, and in the aftermath, it became clear that even his closest staff view him, and by extension the department, as a chaotic mess. Trump twice voiced his steadfast support for his bumbling frat boy secretary, likely reassuring Hegseth that his job is safe, at least for a few days, until Trump changes course yet again. Speaking of changing course, the administration has racked up an unparalleled record of court defeats, freezing or reversing Trump's outlandish flurry of executive orders, each case exposing yet another lawless power grab. The most high-profile setbacks came in challenges to the administration's unconstitutional deportations of hundreds of people to a torturous gulag in El Salvador, often under circumstances suggesting a deliberate scheme to evade judicial review and due process. By week's end, the courts had ordered the administration to stand down in an astonishing 100-plus cases. Speaking of 100, the 100-day mark of Trump 2.0, the traditional benchmark for evaluating an administration's major accomplishments, will be here tomorrow. Trump has unleashed chaos across the federal government and key sectors of civil society, but his record of actual policy achievements in immigration, the economy, foreign affairs, and the other areas he loudly touted on the campaign trail remains conspicuously threadbare. To help chronicle a week in which the Trump administration's demolition project has targeted not just the federal government, but the world order and America's place within it, we welcome three of the country's most experienced and insightful commentators. And they are Representative Ted Lieu. It's been a while. It's so good to see him back. He serves in his fifth term now, representing California's 36th congressional district. He is co-chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Ted is a former active duty officer in the U.S. Air Force and served in the reserves, retiring with the rank of colonel in 2021. Thank you for your service, and thank you, as always, for returning to Talking Feds.
Thank you, Harry.
Beto O'Rourke, the former representative for Texas's 16th congressional district, a position he held from 2003 to 2019. He founded and he currently leads Powered by People, a Texas-based organization dedicated to expanding democracy and achieving democratic victories through robust voter registration and direct engagement efforts. Congressman O'Rourke, Beto, can we call you? Thanks very much for coming back.
It's good to be back, Harry. Thank you.
And I've actually a quick little anecdote. We do in Talking San Diego these one-on-one conversations, and they have these lightning rounds. And Rick Wilson was here last 2 days ago, and I asked him, next state to go from red to blue? And he said, Texas.
I like that.
And finally, Tara Setmayer, the co-founder and CEO of the Seneca Project. Formerly, Tara was a CNN political commentator and a Republican communications director on Capitol Hill. She is also a resident scholar at the UVA Center on Politics. Very nice to see you again, Tara Setmayer.
Oh, always a pleasure to join you guys.
Okay, so I wanted to start with at least some attention on the Ukraine-Russia war. We generally focus on domestic issues here and maybe the administration's assault on democratic rule, and there certainly have been plenty of those this week. But these latest developments, they're not just seismic in themselves, but also for what they potentially portend for the U.S.'s standing in the world. So let me just briefly set it up. The administration seemed to adopt a brass knuckles approach to Ukraine, putting an offer to end the war on the table that was ludicrously favorable to Russia and telling our erstwhile ally, take it or we're walking away. So let me ask your thoughts. Is this ultimatum real? Is the U.S., as not just Trump, but Vance would have it, really ready to walk if Ukraine doesn't accept this offer?
Donald Trump said that he was going to basically end the war on day one. Turns out, like many other things, he was wrong. And Ukraine had previously accepted a ceasefire, and Trump was trying to get Putin to accept a ceasefire. And then you may have remembered on Palm Sunday, Putin launched weapons that killed a whole bunch of civilians, including women and children. And that was a giant middle finger to Donald Trump. And then Putin recently just did that again with another attack on civilians. So I don't think Putin is interested at all in any peace negotiations because Putin believes he's winning. And my view is until you stop Putin on the battlefield, he's not going to come to the peace table.
I think the challenge here, though, is that everyone knows that Donald Trump made all of these promises that he would fix this on day one, and this was such an easy thing, and it's not. I think in the back of his mind, he was thinking of ways that he could just capitulate to Putin and be done with this Ukraine thing because the average American didn't really care. They cared about domestic policy. But then you realize that the American people actually do care what happens to Ukraine. They understand the significance of defending our European ally and their fight for democracy. And I think they underestimated the issue and how important it was from a macro level to the average American. I think they thought they could get away with this. We're not going to send money over there. And him trying to change the history here and that try to assert that Putin was somehow not the aggressor. The American people called BS on that. They said, no, we're not stupid. We saw what happened. He invaded this country. And then also the awful way that he treated Zelensky in the Oval Office did not help their position at all. I think the American people saw that and were not okay with it. So what's happening now is they're looking for a way, I think, also to distract from what's happening domestically and with Donald Trump and this administration basically trying to tank our economy. And now they're looking for a foreign policy win. They need something before the first 100 days because they really don't have any wins, right? They don't really have any major wins. And usually by now in the first 100 days, there's something to point to because this is where you have your most political capital. And they don't really have any wins. They've got a whole lot of losses. Now, they would think maybe what's happening with immigration is a win, but we can even talk about that later. I would say no for all kinds of reasons. But I think we have to be worried that Trump may just get frustrated with this and just throw his hands up and give it all away to Putin, which has much greater global consequences for Europe and for our alliances than just saying, well, oh well, that's over with now. We don't want to deal with that. I think it could really be a precursor to a much larger conflict, potentially World War III. And I'm not being hyperbolic there when I say that.
I also think that we just don't know, as with anything Trump proposes, says, or does, it can be just as quickly rescinded or changed or, in his mind at least, forgotten about. He never said this. He never promised he was going to do this. I think also it's a reflection of his view on power, which I think he sees as a virtue in and of itself. And within that worldview, if you don't have power or you are at a power disadvantage, then there is something wrong or bad about you, or you're dispensable or disposable. And that is true for Ukraine. That is true for an immigrant denied due process. That is any marginalized or vulnerable part of this country. He sees you as weak, and he sees you also as an opportunity to build his power. With Ukraine, I'll dispense with our 80 plus year worldview that we want to make the world safe for democracy, that we are against aggression and territorial expansion through the use of arms. I'll disregard the bipartisan consensus on the need to defend Ukraine, not just for the sake of Ukraine, but for every treaty ally that we are sworn to protect and defend, because after they roll through Ukraine, what is next? And what does that mean for the 18, 19, and 20-year-old service members who will be sent into harm's way if we actually fulfill those obligations? It's his view on power at the end of his first term. It's his view on power in not just exploring, but promising that he will pursue a third term. And so I think for all of us, the people who care, not Democrats, but Americans who believe in the Constitution, rule of law, and the basic fundamental values and morality that has undergirded America's success for 250 years, we've got to be able to overcome this. And we've got to do that by helping to shape public sentiment and show people what is going on here, and that this is not normal. It is not okay. And not only is it going to hurt the people of Ukraine, it's going to be devastating for America, our allies, and our standing in the world.
Yeah, let me follow up on that, including the point that, well, Tara and you have now made, Beto, because I think his calculation has been, and it's been galling to me, that a lot of these really important existential issues have not gotten purchased. But, Zelensky was this Churchillian figure in the country for many years, and I think he maybe did miscalculate, thinking that the country would simply not worry about it or be indifferent. Somehow this issue, maybe because of its human dimension, I think it was Zelensky being pilloried for wearing a T-shirt and no problem with Bukele, actually is hitting home in the public mind.
So the Ukrainians are still very supportive of Zelensky. The Ukrainians are very supportive of their own country, and they are just going to keep fighting against Russia. I think the Europeans are also stepping up, which is helpful. And if Trump walks away, I don't know what that means. Does it mean he walks away from trying to get a peace deal? Or does it mean he walks away from supporting Ukraine whatsoever? Those are two very different things. And it is not clear exactly what he means by that. And he may not even know at this point in time what he means by that.
Well, Vance is suggesting, it seems to me, the latter. Both Beto and Tara have adverted to it. So let's just, call it out. Let's say it's true. We walk away and withdraw from the situation, leaving a gap for Europe and Ukraine as best it can. What does it mean for our place in the world? If we're out of this one, what does it say overall for, more broadly, our whole place in geopolitical structure?
It destroys everything that so many Americans have served and suffered for. Every one of our fellow Americans who landed on those beaches in June of 44 in Normandy to defeat fascism and defend democracy here at home. Every service member, including Ted Lieu, who has willingly put their life on the line for this country and has inspired so much of the rest of the world who rallied to our side. The only time we've invoked the Article 5 of our NATO Mutual Defense Treaty is after we were attacked in 9/11. How many of our allies have lost men and women within their armed services defending our interests and pursuing our goals around the world? We will not only no longer stand for those values and not only dishonor the service and sacrifice that came before, but we will open ourselves up to vulnerabilities that for 80 years, no American has ever experienced. We will have no one by our side. I mean, maybe we'll have the president of El Salvador, I don't know, but no one who can really make a meaningful difference in our security, the security of the world, the positive aspect of the interconnectedness of the global economy, which for better or worse has kept world war at bay for more than 80 years. And now I'm not so sure if the precedent is established that Russia or any other power can invade a neighboring country with impunity, take that land. The United States will recognize it and perhaps even encourage it.
And force the defender to say, oh, it was legitimately annexed, which is part of the terms here.
And you know what? What a badass Zelensky is and was in the Oval Office. I think it perhaps was the week before. Keir Starmer was there, bowing and scraping. We've got this wonderful invitation for you to have an audience with the king, and Mr. President, you're the most wonderful, amazing. I get that as a strategy. It's so dehumanizing, demoralizing, and uninspiring. By contrast, for Zelensky, ganged up by literally the most powerful people on the planet, to stand his ground and to stand up, as Tara was pointing out and Ted was pointing out.
And be clear-headed about it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, that is a leadership we need. And then in addition, además, to see him this week says, hey, take it or leave it. And he's like, you know what? I'll leave that deal. I'm going to fight. That guy is a hero. I don't need a plane ride out of Ukraine. I need weapons. I need arms. I need ammunition. I'm going to fight these fuckers. So that's the spirit, I think, frankly, of America. That's the spirit of our allies. That's inspiring to me. I hope he holds his ground. And I hope this country, regardless of Trump and Vance and Rubio, rallies to his side as we have ever since that invasion took place.
That's the spirit of America that Donald Trump despises, because he's a coward, because he's never served, because he's a maladjusted man-child that's never had a healthy relationship, so he doesn't understand the importance of having allies and friends. So everything is transactional for him, and he actually looks down on people who show courage, who show fight, because he is the complete opposite of all of that. That's why when using the term "make America great again" it bugs me, because he hates everything that makes America great. He's trying to undermine all of that, including that fighting spirit, including the spirit of telling the bullies to go fuck themselves. No, we're not. They'll come and take it. Like he can't relate to that, because that's not who he is. So he tries to co-opt those things and make it his own in the image of the insecure little dictator that needs to have all the powers around him consolidated so that there's no dissent, because he can't handle it, because he's so insecure and weak. He's the complete opposite. That's why he hates Zelensky. And so, and why he admires Putin, because Putin's another one, right? He's another one. He's a weak guy, but he's surrounded by the powers of having the Russian government and everything that comes along with that. That's why they squash dissent. So it's pretty obvious why he's more attracted to the Putin model versus the Zelensky model, just because of his own flawed personality. But unfortunately, he has the power and the levers of the American government, and the consequences of his maladjusted narcissism is global. And so that's, I think the greater point that we've made here is that we all, unfortunately, have to suffer at the whims of his dysfunction. And the consequences of this are enormous, and the damage is enormous. I wouldn't want to be in Taiwan today worrying about whether they're going to get invaded by China. That's right. Are we next on the map? Because you think China's not watching what's going on, and China's watching how Donald Trump operates. They see that he'll flinch. And so what's to stop them from saying, well, he's going to abandon Ukraine. We don't have to worry about them. If they're not going to stand up for their allies in Europe, then they're sure as hell not going to stand up for Taiwan. And once again, cascading effect.
Speaking of which, if you are an adversary thinking of, is this a good time to attack? the disarray at the Department of Defense has to make things seem kind of attractive. So I think it's a fair segue to the whole Hegseth mess. And maybe I can start with you, Congressman, on this, because Trump has twice stood behind him, but that's not so unusual in advance of a, spend more time with my family kind of resignation. You said flat out, he's got to go. What's your thinking, not just Department of Defense, but I think that this also does tie into issues that are outside of our shores.
So as Beto knows, when we would go to a classified briefing, the first thing they made us do is to remove our phones. And that's because phones can be hacked. And what we now know is that Pete Hegseth, on multiple occasions, used his personal phone and released advanced information on combat operations, which put military pilots' lives at risk. And some of these people getting this information clearly should not have gotten it, including an Atlantic reporter, as well as Pete Hegseth's wife. And this is just a complete breakdown of operational security. The Secretary of Defense should resign just because of that. But in addition to that, he has total chaos in his department. He's had numerous high-level staffers fired. He's now wasting taxpayer dollars installing a makeup studio in the Pentagon. And right, nothing screams warrior culture like a makeup studio. So he is completely unfit for the job. And look, Donald Trump, what we learned in the first term is Trump's not going to fire Hegseth until he does. So we just don't know how the president thinks. And I think we just keep putting pressure on. And eventually, I think Donald Trump may well, in fact, decide to have Hegseth go.
All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. Today's spirited debate comes with a bit of a twist as we look to the very top of the wine bottle and ask which is better, cork or screw top? At face value, people think screw top equals cheap wine, which, as it turns out, isn't exactly true. The reason for screw tops is to ensure the wine tastes as the winemaker intended. Cork, which has been used to seal wine bottles for over 100 years, is a proven way to age wine effectively by allowing minute amounts of air to come in contact with the wine. This slowly develops a softer texture and enhances flavor. Now cork, traditional as it is, has a downside called TCA, which causes something called cork taint. Now cork taint, while affecting a very small percentage of wines, can be a big disappointment, causing a musty aroma similar to the smell of wet cardboard and contaminating a great bottle of wine. We turn back again to screw caps, which are cork taint proof, of course, not to mention much easier to open, especially in a kitchen surrounded by witnesses. How the aging process affects wines with a screw cap is yet to be known, as wineries continue to test. Whether it's a cork or screw top, at Total Wine and More, our guides will help you find the perfect wine to match your tastes. After all, it's not just about what's on top of the bottle, it's what's inside that counts.
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine and More for today's spirited debate. This is sort of a political insider question, but you guys have both been in different ways, Beto and Tara, political insiders. It does feel to me from my time in D.C., you put your ear to the ground, and it's not simply the fecklessness and all the things that you were worried about when he was narrowly confirmed. But you're at that level of disarray. You have his spokesperson saying it's a total mess and chaos for the last month. That to me is sort of a harbinger of, it's hard to see how he hangs on, no?
Why is anyone surprised that the Fox News weekend host cosplaying as the Secretary of Defense would screw it all up this quickly? I mean,
in this way.
Right. I mean, the whole frat bro thing about look at me, I'm so cool, I'm a SecDef is not okay. This is one of the most powerful positions in the world besides the president and vice president. You're controlling the most powerful military in the world, the largest government organization in the country, including our troops lives, not just domestically, but abroad. The gravitas in which every Secretary of Defense we've ever had has brought to that position and the seriousness. And then you compare that to this guy, the guy, throwing hatchets on Saturday mornings and doing keggers with his buddies, and a serial philanderer, someone who ran veterans organizations into the ground. He lacks integrity. He lacks honesty. He lacks discipline. And this is who you hand the keys to our military to? And then you turn around and wonder why he's running around recklessly, chatting it up, like how cool am I with this new gadget I've got here? Or I could talk about war plans. Look at me. Oh my God. And then he's got the audacity to question the merits of DEI, of minorities and women in the military and their fitness. And you want to talk about meritocracy? And you have this buffoon running the Department of Defense? Talk about a DEI hire. Didn't earn it. That is Pete Hegseth. And I want to make a point that it was a male Secretary of Defense that installed a makeup room in the Pentagon. I don't want to hear shit about women in the military ever from him.
What about that? 3 million plus people in the military. There have been buffoon figureheads, but he seems to be really mucking around in it. What does the portrait of him as the top person do to the morale of the whole? And I don't mean that rhetorically. Does a joker like him atop actually have an impact, you think, on our fighting readiness?
It certainly could. People look up to the Secretary of Defense. You have young enlisted folks who look up to leadership. You have senior commanders who take orders, right, from senior leadership. And I'll tell you this story. So George Washington University does this sort of training seminar for colonels, 06s, and they bring them to Capitol Hill. And I was speaking at that seminar, and my staff had written me a perfectly fine speech. And I basically said, I'm not going to give that speech today. I basically said to them, I just want you to consider, what are you all going to do if you get an order that's batshit crazy? Are you going to execute it? Are you going to say, look, this order is batshit crazy, I'm not going to execute it? Are you going to stand up? Are you going to resign? So I wanted these folks to at least think about that. And that was not something I ever thought I'd ever be giving a speech on, but we're now in that place where when you start seeing really crazy stuff coming from senior leadership, what are military members expected to do? And it's a frightening question.
I'm just curious, what was the response in the room? Were they as horrified at the prospect of that it was no longer notional, that it was like plausible?
They were largely silent. I think they were thinking, which was good. I didn't really expect them to give an immediate response, but I wanted them to at least think about it, because we're in a different situation than we've been in before.
Shout out to my alma mater, GW.
Let me try to translate it to the political realm, though, because at least the Senate has always seemed to take, more ownership and pride in national security issues. And it was by the skin of his teeth, like others, that, 50 with Vance breaking the tie and terrible pressure put on Joni Ernst, who everyone then looked to. But if you're a Republican senator who voted for him, don't you have to worry that if some terrible shitstorm ensues, it's going to be laid at your feet? You already have one member of Congress calling for resignation. Do you think the Senate is at a minimum already hoping that Trump will put them out of their misery and, more likely to be pushing quietly for this problem to just be removed?
I think not until senators fear someone other than Trump. He is their sole focus in their political world. And you mentioned the example of Joni Ernst, and Tom Tillis is another one. There go our profiles in courage, right? And they knew, it was clear, they signaled that they understood the problem. They knew how compromised he was. They knew how bad it would be for our service members, for the people of the United States of America who depend on those who defend us. And yet they feared Trump more than the truth or the consequences of the decision. I think that's why these town halls that are taking place around the country, whether the members of Congress go to them themselves or they're held in their absence, are so powerful, because it's a reminder that these people put you in that place of power in the first place. And they have the ability to remove you from that. And the moment that senator fears for their reelection, not because of Donald Trump signaling to the electorate that this person's no good, but because the electorate is already turning on them. And I think just to build on what Tara and Ted have said about the consequences of Hegseth, I mean, yes, he's ridiculous and it's funny that he's got the makeup studio, but he's really putting service members' lives in harm's way. I mean, to Ted's point, not only when I was on the Armed Services Committee would I never be read in to an upcoming attack plan. If I wanted to see the plan after the fact, not only would I surrender my phone, I couldn't take notes in. I couldn't take any notes out. I couldn't take an aide in to help me work through that stuff. It is that sensitive, that secret, and that important because literally lives are on the line. And so I think if we can communicate to the American public, this guy is putting you and your family in harm's way. If you're a service member, if you're in the Air Force, if you're in any one of the branches, he's putting you in harm's way. If you're a soybean farmer, these tariffs, he's putting you in harm's way. If you're an immigrant, or if you just care about due process in the US Constitution and 3 co-equal branches of government, he's putting you in harm's way. If you believe in our democracy and that no president should be able to even muse about seeking a third term, especially after the end of their first one, they incited violence and an insurrection that almost took the lives of members of Congress, he's putting you in harm's way. If you're one of those cops whose life is on the line day in, day out, policing your community or policing the Capitol, he's putting you in harm's way. I mean, there's a real consequence, a life and death consequence to the Trump administration, to the decisions he's making, to the people that he has empowered. And it's not just Hegseth. It's Kristi Noem. It's not just Kristi Noem. It's Pam Bondi and compromising justice and rewarding corruption in New York City with Eric Adams. And it doesn't just end there. It's Sean Duffy and the safety of being able to get on an airplane and hope to land in one piece when you get to the other side. This rewarding of loyalty over competence is Tin Pot Dictator 101. And we will be a banana republic at the end of this unless we overcome it. Now, and I think the way you overcome it is you get Tara out there, you get Ted out there, and they connect the dots for people. And whether we're Republicans or Democrats, we're like, holy shit, this is hurting me, this is hurting my family, and I got to put a stop to that, not in 2026, but right now. When he did family separation in 2018. Remember, you'd travel 2,000 miles with your baby in your arms. You get to our front door. You finally have found salvation. And that baby is literally torn from your arms. You're deported back to Honduras. The kid is put in foster care. You may never see that child again. And there's still families that have not been reunited. So many people were so outraged and pissed off and came out. I remember I was at a protest in Tornillo, Texas on June 18th of 2018. By that next week, because public sentiment was so strongly against him, he rescinded zero tolerance and family separation. So I need to remind everybody, we really have power despite how dark it has come and how late the hour is. We still have power in a government of, by, and for the people, but we must share these stories and connect the dots so that people understand what's at stake.
When people stood up and fight back, you see the administration backing down. And so the administration has recently announced that they're going to restore the visas of international students. You see them back down in a number of other sort of stupid actions that they've taken. And so, one of the best ways to deal with a bully is to fight back. And then when the bully gets confronted, you're going to see the bully back down.
You punch him in the mouth is what I would say when it comes to a bully.
Or the no. And even better is collective action. So look, Beto, that was really beautifully put. And I think we've seen the fruits of it. In fact, let's move into more general terms. You have the Department of Justice, and wow, that's my lookup, but very much on its back heels in the Abrego Garcia case. What might have seemed to them like an arcane issue is really hitting home. I don't know if this is happening to you, Congressman, but call lines are being flooded with concerns about this. On the other hand, they're doing a lot of tricks in the immigration area. We saw today the arrest of a state judge in Wisconsin for saying, don't arrest an immigrant in my courtroom. I don't think that'll hold up. I see this in the university area. They're sort of back and forth, and it feels A, like there's an absence of real resolve, and B, that there's an absence of real knowledge or planning. Like, who the hell is making decisions that they then go back on kind of the day after. And then, I mean, this is the basic problem with the economy. He has set up a lot of situations where, and they're unconstitutional as can be, but even when he loses, he wins in a way. Harvard is pushing back. They'll win that case, but he's going to make life difficult for them for years going ahead. Same with the law firms. Even if tomorrow somehow he were gone, you have to imagine that not just the European community, but the Chinas and others of the world are thinking, you know, there's still some MAGA people there. There's still J.D. Vance. The best case scenario, I think, is no longer, we can say in these 100 days, that we absorb the damage and put it behind us in short order.
Absolutely. If I'm Europe, economically, I no longer have a reliable trade alliance, economic alliance with the United States. I'm looking at China. I'm looking at the rest of the world. All my eggs were in this basket. Man, we got to diversify quickly. If I'm Europe and for nearly 80 years, I've had the protection of the United States nuclear umbrella, and that is gone. And I believe that the United States would honor its commitments under NATO. And I think that's gone too. Let's be honest. If Putin rolls through Ukraine and hits Poland next, is Donald Trump going to send us to war against what seems to be, for all intents and purposes, his closest ally on the world stage? I don't think so. I just don't think it's happening. And so if you're Poland or Estonia or Lithuania or Latvia, what are you thinking right now? What are you going to do? Do you have any confidence in the United States? And to your point, Harry, will you have confidence even after Donald Trump is gone? Because you could have someone else like Trump come up. We're just no longer the dependable ally. If you're Canada, if you're Mexico, and you've been humiliated on the world, I mean, fuck, for, saying you are our 51st state and just rubbing Trudeau's nose in it, and the Canadian people for that matter, who, by the way, have had our backs for, as long as any of us can remember, where are they looking now? So all of that makes us less safe, less secure, less prosperous, less able to expect order in our world, more chaos, more vulnerability, more threats, potentially more attacks, more economic disruption, just a harder life for every single American. So my hope is that we help Ted after 2026 with some new allies in Congress to hold this administration in check and stop it before it goes too far, and that he can then serve with a Democratic president in 2029 who can begin to restore some of this. But Harry, to your point, it's questionable as to how much of this can ever be restored. The dollar as a reserve currency. I mean, we could just go down the list. It's all precarious or on its way out.
Department of Justice will never be the Department of Justice. It's my lookout, but it's like a zombie land now.
One of the biggest accomplishments of Donald Trump is dismantling and undermining and destroying democratic institutions in less than 100 days. The rapid pace and intensity in which they've accomplished this destruction is pretty remarkable. I mean, it took Hitler 6 months. We're not at 100 days yet. I mean, it's quite alarming. A lot of us were concerned about this. We warned about it. They also wrote a 1,000-page manifesto blueprint of what they would do in Project 2025 that the mainstream media largely ignored and let Trump get away with acting as though he'd never heard of it. Now they're literally page by page executing what's right in there. It's right there. So I think it could take a generation to recover from this. However, it's important for people to know where to place blame. It's just human nature. Whose fault is this? Who did this to me? And Donald Trump was very good at placing blame in the wrong places, but he channeled that frustration and anger from a lot of people and placed it wherever, and whether it was on immigrants or whether it was on people of color or women or whoever they felt aggrieved by. And that was a successful strategy for him. And I think that Democrats now need to make sure that the American people, including the MAGAs, know where to place that blame. When Beto was just talking about all of the things that are being hurt by what Donald Trump is doing and what MAGA is doing, whether it's veterans, whether it's teachers, whether it's our seniors, you go down the list because virtually every demographic in America is being hurt by him. We did for the Seneca Project, we're a content organization, we're a messaging organization. And we started off the year with an ad called Unsafe. Do you feel safe in Donald Trump's America? And force people to answer that question. And we went down a litany of things, starting with the planes and what they were doing with the FAA and putting these incompetent people in these positions. Then we did another ad called Betraying the Brave, because Donald Trump is the first president in American history to ever betray our veterans and our people in uniform. No president's ever done that. And our farmers, he's betraying them. I think it's betrayal more than just hurting. It's betrayal. We have an ad out now called He's for Them. We took the they, them ad that was very unfortunately successful against Kamala Harris and turned it around and said, Donald Trump's not for you. He's for them. And the them, they're the billionaires and his cronies. And we listed people who were voted for Donald Trump that said, oh my gosh, I didn't expect it to be me, or I didn't expect to lose my business. I didn't expect prices to go up. I didn't expect, no, well, guess who to blame? Donald Trump did this to you. And I think for Democrats, it's important on the messaging front, and Beto's very good at this too. Pete Buttigieg's another, Congressman Lieu's another, people that speak plain language, they understand. Constantly repeat, Donald Trump did this to you. And it's hard for the MAGAs to compute that sometimes because they don't want to admit that they were wrong or that how could Donald Trump betray me? But the more real world examples, it's hard for them to deny it. Because when you start messing with people's money, especially with the economy, it's hard to deny. Now, they can say, you see what they're trying to do. They're using a propaganda tool to try to tell people that the pain, they're gaslighting you. We have to pay a little bit now. It's okay for America to be a little poorer because in the long run, it'll benefit you. That is so ass backwards, and we all know this. So you need to ask people, are you willing to bankrupt yourself, lose your livelihoods, lose your family farm, lose everything your legacy and your family has worked for, your 401k, your retirement? Are you willing to lose all of that for Donald Trump? Challenge them.
And thank you for joining this episode of Talking Fed. No, let me say one thing, because I want to serve this up to you, Congressman. I'm sorry, because you've got 3 major league gripers here. And that's, I would say I spend most of my time just trying to educate, like, here's why this is so dangerous. If you've been in government, here's why that's a demolition, et cetera. You probably don't have that luxury, right? You have to be thinking more constructively of what to do to sort of advance things, both for the party, but for the country. What is your sense of a sort of overall turnaround strategy? How are you and your colleagues thinking about this?
So what I want to first say is everything all of you are doing is super helpful. Donald Trump, after inauguration, was a +6 approval. A recent poll, Pew Research poll, has him at 59% disapproval, only 40% approval.
A little worse than Trump 1.0, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a pretty shocking swing in basically 3 months. And so the American people are now starting to pay more and more attention. And when they do that, they realize how chaotic and how awful the Trump administration is. And why is it important to drop his poll numbers? Because it gives Republicans more courage to stand up to him. And so, Harry, you had mentioned earlier that there was one Republican House member that has now publicly said Hegseth should resign. I think it's helpful that Trump's poll numbers started dropping, gives him more courage because he is in a swing district and he's got to win his swing district as well. And as Beto said, when people start fearing that they're going to start losing their seats, that also gives them more spine and courage to stand up against some of the really stupid things the administration is doing. And all of this is super helpful to get the American people engaged and get people educated and get people to go to town halls, to go in marches and rallies and protests. All of that is extremely helpful.
Yeah, because the righteous anger of the American people is what moves things. And we've seen this throughout history when there have been injustices in this country. It might have taken a little longer than we liked, but it took the righteous anger of the American people coming together to say, no more. We're not going to put up with this, which is another reason why Donald Trump is trying to squash dissent, which is why he's trying to instill fear in people, why they're arresting judges, why they're making spectacles of these arrests of immigrants, why they are making these threats and throwing the power of the Department of Justice around, and why they're doing all those things is to chill dissent. There's a reason why he wants to invoke the Insurrection Act. He's just itching to do it because he wants to throw the hammer down and to hell with the Constitution or the ethics of it, and surrounding himself with sycophants that are not going to tell him no, unlike the first time around. So the American people, I think, need to be prepared. They need to stay steadfast in that, because it's a lot harder to do it when you've got millions of people in the streets. But these protests that are happening every weekend, these town halls, this is fantastic, because it was RFK, the good one, who said that tiny ripples of hope create a current that can take down obstacles of oppression, roughly. And that's what it is. We were all these tiny ripples of hope that are creating this current. And it's going to eventually, at some point, it's going to come to a head. Now we have to all stay vigilant. It's a fire hose all the time, right? It's so many things going on, but each of us plays a role. And then eventually you're going to see more and more people, including the ones who may not have been persuadable before. Because like I said, rule number one in politics is you don't mess with people's money. And money isn't red or blue, it's green. And when people start to see their own lives are threatened by the chaos, by the proposals, by what Donald Trump is doing, they're going to say, I'm not okay with that. And then, hopefully we still have elections in 2026, but people need to understand that the midterms have already started. You cannot wait to, the old conventional wisdom of when to start campaigning and when to start putting out messages and all of that, maybe not for another 6 months until the fall. All that's out the window because Donald Trump and MAGA never stop. They never stop. They continue on and they find weaknesses and they exploit those. So what we need to do, and I will say this because we're in NFL draft time, defense may win championships, but offense wins elections. Go on offense. You see what happens when you go on offense against a bully. What happens when you're on offense all the time? What happens? That's what Republicans do. They do that muzzle velocity, right, of crazy, which is what Steve Bannon says. You could throw it all at them because now you have to constantly defend. Put those Republicans on defense because they have to explain. How do you explain that you voted for Pete Hegseth, who was a incredibly sexual assaulter? He has a problem with alcohol, potentially. He ran these organizations into the ground, and now he is endangering our troops and our readiness in the country, and you still voted for him. How do you explain that, sir, ma'am? And go to town halls and put them on the spot. How do you explain voting for RFK Jr., who has, we're now on the precipice of a potential measles outbreak in the United States when it was eradicated before, but you seem to think that this guy was qualified. He was a heroin addict in college. He has a brain worm. He has a weird obsession with like shooting cubs or something. And this is the person you put in charge of HHS. Why do you think that person was qualified? I mean, they need to ask them constantly, make them defend this. And then that's when you get them on the defense and it doesn't look good for them. And then you cut an ad and you go to the ballot box and say, I'm not voting for you anymore because this is BS. We need someone that's not going to sell our country down the river and put people like that in charge. I mean, it seems simple, but.
I actually think from my own little lookout, something like that is happening with Abrego Garcia. They're taking a week break and they're like, we want to cut our losses because they want to be, saying every day in the communications war, we're getting rid of these terrible immigrant criminals. And instead, everybody is focused on this.
You have to do it at the 30,000 foot level, right? They're hoping that people get caught up in the minutia, but you don't. We don't care what Abrego Garcia did. If he's a bad guy and he broke the law, then we have due process for that. That's what the Constitution is for. So you, Republican MAGA person who walks around with your pocket Constitution, explain to me how the Constitution justifies this circumventing of due process. Because what about your MAGA people who you complain were so, weren't treated fairly? What about your January 6th patriots you claim? What if we applied the same thing to them? Which is it? You can't be a hypocrite.
I mean, good luck with that conversation, but I hear you.
No, I mean, I'm just using that as an example, but you know what I'm saying.
But this is your old tribe. You may know best because it does seem to me that, at least as of now, the administration is perfectly indifferent to contemptuous of, probably the majority of the country now. Is the hope somehow that, they'll actually have to attend to that majority? Or just that they'll be, so shamed for the conduct that you try to make them own that at least there'll be some little inroads of responsibility within the members of Congress and the Senate? What needs to be done to actually erode, at an operational level, this whole total demolition authoritarian project?
To Tara's point about the people, James Madison in 1788, and I'm going to paraphrase him, basically said something along the lines of, at the end of the day, it's the virtue of the people that saves democracy. I mean, it's not going to be your 435 members of the House that is going to, save democracy. It's going to be the American people. And so the more American people rise up and make their voices heard, the more courage it gives to 435 members of the House to do the right thing and stand up to this president. And so if you can get more Republicans to stand up to Donald Trump, that would be enormously super helpful. Democrats have introduced a number of pieces of legislation that would stop a number of the really stupid things the administration is doing. We need 3 Republicans to join us. And so you're not going to get 3 in the first 100 days, but maybe in the first 200 days, you might get 1 or 2, and maybe, in 9 months, you might get a third one. And so we just have to keep pushing and try to get more and more people to stand up to all the crazy actions the administration is taking.
Yeah, that rhymes with Lincoln's line from 1858, public sentiment is everything. And, in that speech, he says, more so than the courts, and to Ted's point, more so than Congress and these other institutions, in a democracy, a government of, by, and for the people, it is the people. And you look at 60 years and a month ago, almost to the date, 24-year-old John Lewis taking his life in his hands, crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It's not an election year. People have been fighting for this since 1890. It was the last time we had a real Voting Rights Act before Congress, 75 years ago. And this guy, along with so many others across the country, are doing everything they can. No one knows what's going to hit or what's going to work. They go to the State House steps. They melt down the switchboard at the Capitol. They're writing to the president. They're doing everything they can. And it's this final act of courage on his part and everyone else who marched with him that absolutely shocks the conscience of America. And it galvanizes to the point that LBJ, 8 days later, which, Ted and Tara, Harry, we all know that's light speed in politics. 8 days later, Johnson convenes a joint session of Congress. And he's like, look, as it was at Lexington and Concord, at Appomattox, so it is today. These guys are putting their lives on the line for this country so that we can realize our promise that we have laid out to ourselves and the rest of the world. And you, the members of Congress, you have the power to do it. It took 75 years, but that summer of 65, he signs voting rights into law, creating for the first time in American history a true multiracial democracy, the very one that is under attack unlike any time since. So this moment, look, my faith is in the American people. We are going to meet this moment. And Ted said this, and Tara said this, and they're absolutely right. We as a people have so much power. We need to remind ourselves of that. So you show up to every town hall. You go to every protest. You go to the school board meeting and talk at the call to the public part of that agenda. You do everything you can to connect with every other American. And Tara, quoting RFK, those ripples of hope, they're going to bring down ultimately this administration. We're going to get through it. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick, but we're going to get through this.
It's a really beautiful and important point. And you look back on those pivotal times in 1840 or 55 or even the 30s. And yeah, we now look at somebody who galvanized the country. But it's certainly true that in each of those cases, historians would say the bed was laid by a lot of a lot of change in public sentiment that happened gradually, organically. And I think both are essential. And I gotta take my hat off to all three of you for the inspiration there.
Oh, just one quick point about that. It was about storytelling. It's when those stories were told and the American public saw them. And back through all of those time periods, there were different ways of communicating those stories. And in the 60s, it was television. Bloody Sunday was on TV.
And the dogs at the bridge.
And the dogs
it's
at
really
the bridge,
true.
right? When people started to see what was going on, that is ultimately what started to change sentiment with the American public. And that's the same thing now, because it was Ida B. Wells who said that in order to right the wrongs, you have to shine the light of truth upon them. And that's what we do every day in our respective areas, is to keep shining that light of truth upon them so that people can see what's going on. And you tell those stories and it hits home for folks. And those narratives matter because that shapes opinion. You got to get hearts and minds first, and that's how you get the butts to the ballot.
And that's back at all three of you. And I'm going to just play this in my sleep a few different times. I'm so sorry we're totally out of time, but I think this has been a really valuable conversation. We only have time, ending on a lighter note, for our Talking Five feature, where we take a question from a listener and have to answer it, each of us, in 5 words or fewer. Today's question is, if we're writing our calculations and Hegseth has to go, what will they do with his makeup studio? 5 words or fewer, please.
Turn it into a bar.
Make it into a romper room.
We could always use another restroom.
Exactly. And I'm going for tattoo parlor for political appointees. Thank you so much, Beto, Tara, Representative Lieu. Hope to see you all soon, and an inspiring conversation, really. Have a good week. Thank you so much, Representative Lieu, Beto, and Tara. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts. And please take a moment to rate and review this show. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes, talking books, and bonus video content. Check us out on Substack now, at Talking Fed Substack, where I am posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week, going live and sharing other exclusive content that breaks down the various threats to constitutional norms and the rule of law. You can follow us on Twitter at Talking Feds Pod. Talking Feds remains a completely independent production, so it's your support and nothing else that funds all of our franchises. We just couldn't do it without you. And as you may know, Talking Feds has now joined forces with The Contrarian. I'm a founding contributor to this new media venture, which is committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape, where legacy media seems to be tacking toward Trump for business reasons rather than editorial ones. Rest assured, we are still the same scrappy independent podcast you've come to know and trust, but now linked up with an ambitious and vital project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourses. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the Feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Catherine Devine. Our associate producer is Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McCardle. Rosie Dawn Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadrenathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers, and production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.